Live from New York City and across the country, this is ABC News Election Night 2018. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
9 o'clock here in the East. Polls have now closed in 40 states, although 6 states are keeping their polls open because the lines are so long, the turnout's so long. I want to give you an update on what's happening in the House and Senate so far. Republicans have picked up 1 seat in the Senate. That is a seat in Indiana, Joe Donnelly's seat. They've picked up 1 seat, extended their majority. Democrats have picked up 2 seats in the House. They need 23 to take control. We do have a new result coming in from the House, and this is a disappointment to Democrats. It comes from the state of Kentucky. Amy McGrath, the former Marine combat pilot, defeated by the 4-term incumbent Andy Barr. As you said, Martha Raddatz, she ran a different kind of campaign. It wasn't good enough.
It certainly wasn't good enough, but this is a district that Trump won by 15 points. Her opponent, Andy Barr, looks like will get that 4th term. He was all in on Trump. McGrath did not air any negative ads. She was very straightforward. It was a new kind of model. They put in a candidate who was a combat pilot, who was a Marine, but it just didn't take her far.
And John Carl, the Democrats said they didn't need Amy McGrath to win. We shouldn't read too much into it. But so far, it just has to be said, the Democrats are having, so far, a lot of vote to come in, a disappointing night.
They are not winning where they thought they were going to win. We had 7 potential pickups in the state of Florida. Republicans have held on to 5 of those seats already. Democrats have only picked up 1. We're still waiting for vote count on there. In Virginia, they've only picked up 1 of the seats they were tracking. So Democrats are not winning in the way they were hoping to win early in the night. But like you said, there's a lot of vote to count.
A lot of vote to come in, a lot of suburban vote to come in, Mary Bruce.
And Democrats, I'm sure, are not pleased with what they're seeing down in Florida, John. But Democrats would also argue that they only need 1 seat in Florida. And one important outstanding seat is the one held by Congressman Curbelo down in Florida, which, of course, is a district where Clinton outperformed Trump.
We do have another result coming in. It's coming in from the Senate. Marsha Blackburn, we were just talking about that. Marsha Blackburn will win the Senate seat in the state of Tennessee. Marsha Blackburn, that is a hold for the Republicans right there. She's a strong Trump supporter. Phil Bredesen, former governor, popular in the state, but this is a red state right now. Let's go back to Juju Chang, just outside of Nashville and Blackburn's headquarters.
Well, what we're projecting, George, is that Tennessee is doubling down on Trumpism tonight. You know it's a deep red state, and they will be sending their first female senator from Tennessee. And she's not just any woman. She's a firebrand who calls herself a hardcore, card-carrying conservative and brags about packing a pistol in her purse. She has Velcroed herself to President Trump's agenda. In fact, he came here to this state 3 times to rally for her. In fact, I was there in Chattanooga on Sunday, and one of the biggest applause lines, George, was when they would say, don't give another vote to Chuck Schumer or the D.C. Democrats, and that resonated. She was fighting against, as you mentioned, the moderate governor, the very popular here, who basically campaigned against tribalism, against the divisiveness, and he was endorsed by Taylor Swift, as you know, and the Bredesen camp was very much hoping for the Swift lift, as they called it, because young voter turnout spiked here by 7-fold from the previous midterm election, and yet that wasn't enough, nor was the historic turnout of African Americans. It wasn't enough to bring Bredesen anywhere near. Clearly, Marsha Blackburn was, as predicted by President Trump, the red wall. He said to the extent that there is a blue wave, it will hit a red wall here in Tennessee. And sure enough, that came true. George.
Juju Chang, thanks. Mary Bruce, pretty good trade for President Trump there in Tennessee. The outgoing Republican Senator Bob Corker, frequent Trump critic. Now he gets a hardcore supporter.
Yeah, a complete 180 there. I mean, President Trump was getting a lot of pushback from Bob Corker. He was one of the few Republicans in the Senate who was very, wasn't shy, was happy to speak his mind, happy to take on President Trump. Now the exact opposite.
Cokie Roberts?
Well, we've been seeing women voting Democratic in a lot of these states, but they voted for Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee. And that tells us something, George, because something we've seen historically is that if Republicans put up a woman candidate, she's likely to get more of the female vote than a male candidate does. She doesn't always win it, but she gets more of it.
Certainly came true for Marsha Blackburn there. What are you seeing in the exit polls in Tennessee?
It's so interesting. Phil Bredesen did so many things that you'd think he'd have to do to try to win in Tennessee. He said that Donald Trump was an experienced negotiator. He supported Brett Kavanaugh. He said he was disgusted in both parties by what he saw play out on Capitol Hill. But look in Tennessee, this is what he was up against. He was up against a state where so many people like what they're seeing from President Trump. 57% of the voters in Tennessee approve of the job performance. Was he a factor in your vote? Yep. Look at this. 38% said they support Trump, 26% said they oppose him. You break it down by issues in Tennessee, and by far the number one issue, 38% health care. He tried to push protecting pre-existing conditions that didn't necessarily work for him. But look at this. This is the most telling number out of the exit poll so far in Tennessee. They actually like Bredesen. They like Phil Bredesen. The problem is, George, they like Donald Trump more.
That's true. And, John, you're hearing actually from Donald Trump and his team in the White House.
Yeah, we're told it's a jovial mood in the White House. They're watching returns. They're watching several networks, especially happy with the vote in Indiana, a place the president campaigned in just yesterday. He made that a personal crusade to defeat Joe Donnelly in Indiana. It worked. So happy, they're saying no blue wave, at least not yet.
Not seeing it yet. Perhaps the biggest state on the board tonight, the state of Florida. Let's take a look at what's happening there right now. First in the Senate race, Bill Nelson, coming Democrat, up against Rick Scott, the governor. Look at that, 50-50 right now. Only about 60,000 votes separate the two right there. In the governor's race, Andrew Gillum, 49, Ron DeSantis, 50. Again, very, very close right there right now. This state, always, always so important. Often close. We're seeing that play out in both the governor's race and the Senate race right now. Chris, are you hearing from Governor Scott?
Yeah, and the Scott people feel very good. They say with the vote that's left out there, it's about half in the Panhandle, half in Miami-Dade. So they feel like for both DeSantis and for Scott that these margins are going to hold. And I think the other thing that's important to talk about for a guy like Nelson and for Donnelly and for others, you know, they're going to start questioning Chuck Schumer's decision-making. He spent $8.5 million in the last 3 weeks in New Jersey. And Joe Donnelly and Senator Nelson and whether it's Claire McCaskill, if she has problems later tonight, are going to be wondering. And they're probably going to be sending not thank you notes to Bob Menendez.
We have another result coming in. It's from the state of West Virginia right now. And we are seeing that Joe Manchin, there it is right there, Joe Manchin, Democrat of West Virginia, will hold on to that seat. It looked dicey there for a while, but Joe Manchin, former governor, incumbent senator, will hold on to that seat. No pickup for the Republicans there. But, John, Carl, that was a seat Democrats had to hold.
Absolutely had to hold. Also, by the way, that is definitely Donald Trump's best Democratic friend in the United States Senate. Both a good personal relationship and supported him, and also the one and only Democrat who voted for Kavanaugh to confirm Kavanaugh.
David Muir?
Yeah, take a look at what we're seeing from the exit polls on Joe Manchin. People still like him in West Virginia. That's the thing. He's been around for a long time. 51% of the voters who turned out today say they have a favorable opinion of Joe Manchin. In these final days, he was on his motorcycle crisscrossing the state. He'd actually said that he regretted supporting Hillary Clinton, said he might be open to supporting Donald Trump in 2020 if he agrees with him on a number of issues. And as we know, he famously went against Brett Kavanaugh at the last minute after that Susan Collins speech. He didn't want to be the tipping point on Brett Kavanaugh, but he did come out against Kavanaugh, and it likely helped him in the end here.
Donna Brazil, amazing that Joe Manchin could actually survive West Virginia, the reddest of red states.
You don't know Joe. Joe is a fighter. Joe understands the people of West Virginia. He knows that they want somebody who will stand up for them and fight for them. And he ran a kind of campaign right down the middle where he could still appeal to Democrats, but reach out to independents and be able to eke out a victory.
Sure.
As a Republican, I can tell you, Joe Manchin was my mentor when I became governor in 2010. He can work with everybody, and they know their governor. It's different. When a governor runs for the United States Senate, they know their governor. They feel like they know him, and the negative ads don't work as well.
Especially in a state like West Virginia. Tom, look, go back up to the board now, but let's pull up the state of Florida, because we are going to be, let's pull up the Florida Senate right now. Let's get a sense of where this vote is coming in, because it's so important.
So, you know, earlier in the night, we were talking about how we split up Florida into 3 different parts. And John Carl made the astute point about the vote being out in Broward County so far. Right now, we're talking about maybe a 60,000 vote gap here. And if you look over at Broward County right now, they have 70% reporting. In Miami-Dade, they're at 87%. I think, just from looking at this race, and even though I know Governor Scott spoke with Governor Christie, a lot of the vote is in the Panhandle. All the vote in South Florida is not in yet. So when you look at Nelson is overperforming in Broward compared to Hillary Clinton. He's underperforming in Miami-Dade. But he's doing well in Orange County, Orlando, in Jacksonville. He's doing well right there. If I'm Bill Nelson right now, I'm watching that vote very closely in Broward and Miami-Dade. If the numbers change, he could stay with his seat.
So what would, just for comparison's sake, how much of the vote is in up there in the Panhandle?
So look, when we go to these Panhandle votes, I mean, these are very tiny counties. These are some of the most Republican counties. Santa Rosa, they only account for less than 1%, but 100% reporting in here, 81% reporting in here. 100% here. A lot of the panhandle is in from what we're looking at. South Florida, Broward, Miami-Dade. We need to look at those two counties all night.
Matthew?
Been through a very close Florida race in 2000. That went on for 31 days. On election night, I'm just going to keep in mind, on election night, with 98% of the vote in, we had a 50,000 vote lead. George W. Bush in that campaign had a 50,000 vote with 98% of the vote in. And I looked at what was out, which was primarily Broward and Palm Beach and Miami-Dade. That 50,000 vote margin went to 1,100 votes in about 15 minutes when those came in. And so I think what's going to happen in this race right now, this is very telling. I think most everything that is solid red is in. The deep blue is not fully in.
I'm not sure you know the answer to this, but why does Broward and Miami always come in so late?
Well, you can also look at the voting technology in those areas. Absentee, they have a lot of absentee ballot, but Matt is right. We're going to see this map change in about another hour.
And I'd say one more county, Hillsborough County, which we always thought as the bellwether county in Florida, also still, almost 10% of the vote to count there, and that is a good vote for Democrats.
And he's up right next door in Pinellas, which is the Tampa suburbs as well, a bellwether county that almost always picks the winner in this state. Let's see where he's at right now. It's one of the smaller counties, but he's up 52.5. That's a good number. Even though it's a smaller county, it's a bellwether county. You want to be up there.
And let's not forget, this is the state that Donald Trump calls his second home. There's a very interesting dynamic between Donald Trump and Rick Scott. Scott really tried to distance himself from Donald Trump through much of this. After the hurricane, he ran an ad saying, when I don't agree with it, when I don't agree with him, I say it. But we're looking at a number of things in this race right now. Puerto Ricans who have moved to the state of Florida in the wake of Hurricane Maria, and the youth vote. Let's not forget the Parkland massacre. One source on Capitol Hill told me that in this race, not just particularly to Florida, but around the country, the youth vote could end up being the X factor come tonight.
I'll tell you one thing Rick Scott is going to like in these early exit polls, as this is a nail-biter in Florida, it always is. But look at the demographics when you break it down. Donald Trump approval. This is a state that he won by a little more than 1% over Hillary Clinton just 2 years ago. 51% of the voters who turned out in Florida today said they like the job that President Trump is doing. When asked if he was a factor in the vote, this one is kind of interesting to reconcile to what I just showed you. But 22% they said they turned out to support Trump. 33% said they turned out to oppose. But look at that. 43% fully said Trump not a factor. You break down by issues. Let's look at what's important to Florida voters. Healthcare, by far, issue number one. We're seeing this over and over again in so many of these important states. And when you break it down from healthcare to pre-existing conditions, which is what Democrats in these final weeks tried to make these campaigns about, 48% say the Democratic Party. But there are some good signs in there for Rick Scott and for people who were concerned about Donald Trump being attached to them. Cecilia said Rick Scott tried to separate himself, at least when it came to the hurricane and a few other issues. But by and large, Florida voters today said they approve of what they're seeing from Donald Trump.
And Mary, you've been hearing from Democrats in Florida.
Yeah, I've been talking with some top Senate Democratic aides. One just told me Florida is a little too close for them at this point, not feeling very comfortable. Asked what they think of the night overall. 2 words: not great.
That sums it up. We'll be right back.
This is ABC News Live. I'm Dan Harris up in the skybox. When George and the team go to break, we're going to continue our coverage. Let's take a look at the latest information coming in as we watch this historic evening proceed. ABC News can make a projection, as George has reported, in the state of Tennessee, where Marsha Blackburn has defeated her Democratic opponent, a popular former governor. There was some hope among Democrats that Taylor Swift and a popular former governor who had Taylor Swift's support might be able to take a seat from the Republicans, but it is not going to happen according to our projections. Moving on here, we're looking also at the state of West Virginia, where ABC News can project that the incumbent Democrat Joe Manchin will pull out a victory in a deep red state. This is a man who has been described as you heard during the main broadcast, President Trump's closest Democratic friend in the United States Congress. This is where things stand in the House right now. The Democrats need to take 23 seats. They need a net gain of 23 seats in order to take control back from the Republicans. Thus far, in this early state in the evening, they have picked up 2 seats. Things are still early in the game, but only 2 seats at this point. This is a big night for social media, high engagement. So let's get it over to ABC's Kenneth Moton, who's running point on that beat tonight. Kenneth, what are you seeing?
Dan, we're monitoring states where there is a fight right now to keep the polls open longer. ABC News is reporting that there are 6 states, Alabama, Georgia, Illinois, Indiana, North Carolina, and Texas, that have extended some locations in those states. And again, we know there are lawyers who are in court right now trying to fight many of those secretaries of state to keep the polls open in a number of places where there were polling issues. And if you look behind me here, I can show you that these are the people using the hashtag I voted. You can just see it just light up across the country here, where those people are using that hashtag, because we know that there's a lot of high voter turnout when it comes to this midterm election. Let me just show you, moving on here, there are people like Andrew Gillum, who's in that tight race in Florida for the governor's race, who says, stay in line. If you were in line by 7 p.m., you're allowed to vote. If you have problems, call that number right there, hashtag bring it on. Moving on, let me show you Beto O'Rourke, also in a tight race with Senator Ted Cruz in Texas, saying, if you're in line, stay in line, Dan. So a number of candidates out there who are in those tight races telling folks to stay in line.
Stay in line, the trending hashtag tonight. Kenneth Moton, thank you. We'll be coming back to you a lot during the course of the evening. As we said, this evening is still young. Before we send it back to George, let's take a look at another race that we can project. In Illinois, the governor's race, J.B. Pritzker, the wealthy venture capitalist, he is projected to take that seat. He's a Democrat, beating the Republican governor, Bruce Rauner. This is ABC News Live. As we said, every time George and the team go to a break, we're going to pick up the coverage. For now, though, let's get it back to George from here in the Skybox.
Back now at ABC News Election Headquarters here in New York. Let's take a look at where things stand now in the House and the Senate. So far, the Democrats have picked up 2 seats in the House. They need 23 to take control. In the Senate so far, a good night for Republicans. They've actually extended their majority, picking up 1 seat, the Indiana Senate seat of Joe Donnelly. That's the state in the House and the Senate so far. I want to check in also on governor's races. We haven't talked too much yet about the Georgia governor's race. I want to go to Steve Osunsami in Atlanta, Georgia, where Stacey Abrams, the Democrat, had a bid to become the first African-American governor of the state of Georgia, first African-American female governor in the country. But so far, at least, she is trailing badly behind the Secretary of State, the Georgia Secretary of State, Brian Kemp. Steve.
There are still people in line. They just announced this a second ago after singing the national anthem and singing the black national anthem, that there are people in line in some of the largest counties, in Fulton County here and in Gwinnett County, which is north of here. Some polling locations have been extended till 10 p.m. I will say that the mood here is that they are preparing for the long haul. We listen in on some of the campaign calls over the weekend. They're expecting a runoff, most likely tonight, and are lawyered up, preparing to sue Brian Kemp and to sue the counties to extend early voting, because if there is a runoff in this election, that would take place on December 4th. There are more than 2 candidates in this race. There's also a Libertarian candidate. One person has to get above 50% or above. Because of the polling on this, they're expecting this, despite these numbers that you're reporting, they're expecting this to be very, very tight, and that we could be possibly not getting an answer to who's going to win this election or what's going to happen here till tomorrow morning.
Of course, there's only a runoff if neither candidate breaks 50% there. Of course, we keep an eye on it. We do have something coming in right now. It's the governor of Illinois. It's a switch for the Democrats. J.B. Pritzker has defeated the incumbent Republican Bruce Rauner. J.B. Pritzker, billionaire venture capitalist, close ally of President Obama, has become governor of the state of Florida. And Chris Christie, state of Illinois. I had Florida on my mind. Chris Christie, big win there for J.B. Pritzker. Rauner had he was a businessman, never quite found his footing in that seat.
Bruce just never listened to people about how to try to work with the Democratic legislature to try to bring people together and get things. He didn't get a budget passed for years. You just can't do that. When you're a Republican who wins in a blue state, you've got to work with the Democratic legislature and get things done. Bruce never learned to do that, and tonight he's paying the price.
Matthew Dowd, the Democrats really hoping that these governor's races in the Midwest become their new base.
Yeah, and obviously Illinois is a Democratic state. Hillary Clinton carried it heavy. And I think that they're watching Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, They've already secured Pennsylvania. I think that Iowa is an open state. I think that's where the Democrats, if they have a really good night, if they have a good night in any part of this, it's going to be in those governor's races.
We have some other results coming in the Senate. We have the Minnesota Senate race, Democrat Amy Klobuchar, Senator Amy Klobuchar, cruising to re-election there in the state of Minnesota. She's talked about as a possible 2020 candidate as well. In the state of New Mexico, Senator Martin Heinrich will get his second term. He defeated a contractor, Mick Rich, there in the state. He's going to defeat. He's behind right there, but we project that Martin Heinrich will win the Senate seat in the state of New Mexico. In New York, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand has won re-election. We project that she will win in the state of New York. And in the state of Wisconsin, Senator Tammy Baldwin will be re-elected in the state of Wisconsin. Stephanie Cutter, Democratic strategist, joining us as well. The women Democrats tonight doing pretty well.
They are. And I think that we can see across the board that women are turning out. However, I think the women are turning out. I think men aren't going to Democrats at as high of a margin as we originally thought. There's still a lot left out there. But for the senators in blue states, they're winning handedly. We still have a lot of competitive races.
How do you explain, though, the fact that the House doesn't seem to be coming in quite the way the Democrats hoped?
I think my explanation really is that these are largely suburban districts. Many were toss-ups, many were lean Republican. I think women are turning out in these suburbs, but men are supporting Donald Trump for a good reason, the economy. And they don't want to change that up. And I think that's not something that we had projected.
Abby Hutzman.
You can't underestimate the power that the president has when he lands in these states. And we've seen him travel just recently in the last few days, a number of states a day. You look at states like Tennessee and Indiana, where Republicans are doing better than people were expecting. And I think what he does is he riles up his base. He reminds them why he won and why he needs people on his team to fulfill his agenda. So I think it's more effective when he's on the ground there, bringing the candidates on stage than people give him credit for.
Terry Moran, Stephanie also hit on a point that perhaps we haven't talked about enough tonight. The economy. The economy is going absolute gangbusters right now. That could be working for Republicans.
It usually would, and we were distracted to some degree by what Donald Trump shifted the debate to on immigration. But one other thing about Donald Trump, he tells a story at these rallies, a story of American greatness that I think a lot of people plug into. And Democrats talk about health care. What's the story they're telling about our country?
And the story, the president is telling a story. It looks like a lot of people are also willing to overlook some of the president's rhetoric, the things that he says that aren't true.
Well, and it is women who we expected to see tonight to be leaving because of that rhetoric. But, you know, you go back to Donald Trump in these rallies. He says, no one knows these crowds like I do. And he is expecting that to illustrate, to reflect itself tonight, these thousands and thousands of people that we've seen in these rallies there.
A lot more vote to count. We'll be right back.
Hey, it's Dan Harris up in the skybox as we continue our coverage on ABC News Live. As has been discussed by George and the team, one of the hottest races at this point that people are watching so closely because it is so close. Two big races in the state of Florida, which always seems to get a lot of attention this time of year, every 2 years. And ABC's Whit Johnson, my co-anchor on Weekend GMA, is right there in Tallahassee watching both the governor's race and the Senate race. Whit, what are you hearing and seeing?
Well, Dan, if there was any concern here at Gillum headquarters about the early returns and not enough votes for their candidate, you wouldn't know it. It truly is a party here at Florida A&M University. People are cheering when they see some of the results come up on the TV screens behind us, but it is definitely an uphill battle. Florida always a dramatic race. And close races with the history of that happening here. If you go back to 2016, President Trump beat Hillary Clinton by just over 1%. In 2012, Obama beat Mitt Romney by just about 1%. The last two governor's races here decided by about 1% going for Rick Scott. Now, what's been interesting is we've been watching our primetime coverage and some of the exit polling, and what people are saying are the serious issues here. A lot of people talking about health care in the state of Florida. Of course, there is a retiring, aging community here in this state. And so what Republicans have done to try to counteract the Democratic message on health care is they have been strong, saying that we will protect pre-existing conditions. We will protect Medicare. That's been a message that we've seen from Republican gubernatorial candidate Ron DeSantis. Compare that to Andrew Gillum, who's been pushing more of a Bernie Sanders type Medicare for all message. And when we've been talking to voters here, even those who maybe weren't as sure about President Donald Trump, they weren't fully on board with that. And they were happy with the way the economy was going here in the state of Florida. Low unemployment rate that over the past few months has been tracking lower than the national rate. The other thing that I'm going to be looking for, forgive me, we're actually seeing some more information coming. One thing that I'd like to see here more as we get information is the demographics. Those people who actually showed up to the polls. Democrats were hoping that they can get some gains within the African-American community and with the youth vote. Those groups have been historically dormant during major elections, and so we're waiting to see that. And also the Hispanic vote here in Florida, which has changed in recent years with tens of thousands of Puerto Ricans coming here after Hurricane Maria. So waiting to get more information on that, but as expected, razor-thin margin here in the ultimate swing state. Dan.